All right. Well, we're live once again on Spirits of the Material World. Um, and today's guest is Mark Mustian. Mark, how are you? How you doing? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too, Sean. Thanks.
Mark's down in Tallahassee. Mark, we were just I was just telling Mark he's kind of multifaceted. He's hard to define in one sort of specific area. So, Mark, I'm going to give you a little intro. All right. And you're going to hopefully keep me honest here and tell me if I go astray. But you're based in Tallahassee. We just discussed that. You're an attorney, a former city commissioner.
I am.
Obviously, you're an award-winning novelist and the founder of one of the most unique literary festivals in the country. Your novel, The Gendarme, did I say that correctly?
Yeah, you did.
All right, is a haunting story, a memory of guilt, love, set against the backdrop of Armenian genocide. So that's really going to be interesting to hear a little bit about. And it became an international bestseller, and it's published in over 10 languages. Does that sound pretty accurate? Probably more at this point.
That's right on the money.
All right, and then you have your latest novel, Boy with Wings, a Southern Gothic tale. Well, that's right up the Spirits of the Material World alley, right there.
That's right.
Of a boy born different in a Depression era South, and that just won a grand prize at the Fiction from the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. And again, if that's not enough, Mark is the founder and president of World South Festival of Literature and Music in Tallahassee, now in its 12th year. Congratulations, by the way.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome.
And it's next weekend actually. So we are in full festival mode here at the
moment. So you have authors, musicians, you come together, and it sounded like it's pretty unique. Can't think of anything like it. Is there anything like it in the United States?
No, there's really not. I mean, if you Google book and music festival, we're the only thing that comes up. Somebody told me, oh, there's something sort of like this in England, but I've never really found it. And so yeah, we just, this is year 12. And,
wow.
When we first started this, I was, I'd had the novels published and I got invited with the Gendarme. I got invited to speak at these literary festivals around the country. And I'd never been to one. And they were totally cool. And there was all these people excited about books. They're free. So I went to the Southern Festival of the Book in Nashville. I went to the South Carolina Literary Festival in Columbia, the LA Times Book Festival. And so I was on the city commission in Tallahassee then. And I said, we ought to do something like this in Tallahassee. But I needed to get off the commission in order to do that and have the time to do it. And so I did. I didn't run again. And we started this festival. And we sort of said, well, rather than being the Tallahassee version of the South Carolina Literary Festival, why don't we try and do something different? And so we talked about, well, you could combine, books in the environment or books in politics or books in sports. But the easiest thing to do seemed to be books and music. And so we did. And we had accumulated a bunch of money. We had a great, awesome lineup. And then it rained all weekend long. And so we had, stuff got canceled and messed up and blah, blah, blah. But we felt like we had enough going to keep it going. And so here we are 12 years later. And I thought personally that I would, I'd give this like 5 years and then I'm moving on to something else. But I'm still there, and partly, I'm proud of what we've done, and we've done some really remarkable things. We pair authors and musicians every festival, and some of them have never met. For instance, we did 2 years ago. We did a pairing of the historian John Meacham and this woman who's a guitar phenom named Yasmin Williams. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, and it was my idea, and we approached both of them and said, "Hey, would you be willing to do this? It looks a little different than the ordinary gig." And they both said, "Yeah." And so we had one Zoom call for like 10 minutes, and then they show up at the festival and another conversation for like 10 minutes, and then they just knock it out of the park. It was awesome.
Wow.
that's a sort of example of some of the stuff that they'd never met before.
Wow.
It was great.
So I'm picturing that. What a great idea. I mean, you're basically talking about two different types of storytelling, maybe
Yeah, and
in
it's
terms
sort
of
of
what they do, and somehow that came together.
yeah, and we tell them, hey guys, you do whatever you want to do, and
Okay.
it's amazing what creative people when they're put together,
Yeah.
what they can come up with. And so we've had, some will go back and forth, some want to, I want to read for 20 minutes and then you play for 20 minutes and then let's do something together for 20 minutes. And so it's different almost every time. We've had, we try and have cookbook authors every year, and we will have somebody prepare some of their dishes to hand out to the audience, and then we paired them with musicians. And so that's been a lot of fun. They've come up with new songs about. There's a song a guy came up with called "Pickle Baloney." It was like it was great. So anyway, it's been it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun.
I've had guests on, musicians and producers, engineers, and I've always wanted to know, and well, you can't see it right now, but I have guitar. I love music. I'm in my what's called music room right now, and I can't play very well, but I like to play. And I've always wondered what's the secret, and I don't think there is one, but do you write the words first and then you come up with the riff, or do you write the riff and then you come up with the words? Like how does that, and it's different for everybody. I don't know if you have like what you're doing, you have a writer and you have a musician or a guitar player, like here's the words, let's come up with, here's the words. And then let's play the guitar on top of those words. Did it kind of go down like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of I mean, I can tell you from being a writer myself, I'm not really a musician at all, but I can hear like a rhythm and music when I write. It's hard to describe, but it's there. I mean, there words on the page produce a certain tone
Tone,
and
yeah.
music, and so one of the interesting things at the festival is if you're a musician and you've written a memoir, and they all do at some point, we want you to come to Word of South and read and talk about it. Maybe you want to play a little music too. And so
Makes sense.
I
Yeah.
mean, we've had a whole raft of people, George Clinton, Sheila E., I mean, Rita Coolidge. I mean, just come and talk about, songwriting. Rita Coolidge was, I'd never heard this before. I don't know if anybody had. So she goes, well, the coda to Layla? She goes, I wrote that. She goes, my boyfriend took it from me and gave it to Derek and the Dominoes, and that, that was mine. I'm like, really? Wow. So sort of, stuff like that. That's, but the whole music, and author part, I think is just fascinating because, it's just like you say. I think some musicians have, they have the riff and they need to, come up with words to this somehow. And sometimes it's somebody else's words or whatever, but it's, everybody does it differently. You're exactly right about that.
I just finished reading Keith Richards' book. Fascinating. And
Yeah, I know.
that's how oh, have you read it?
Yeah, did you
Life?
listen to the audio tape or did you actually read it?
I'm kind of old school. I still read the book, the paper,
Yeah,
the
I'm
actual.
sort of half and half now, but I happen to listen to the audio tape of that one, and there's really no music on it, I guess for copyright reasons or whatever. But it was interesting that Johnny Depp reads part, somebody else reads part, and the very last part Keith
Oh,
reads himself.
oh,
And it's very, and it's just so sort of, yeah. Then I went home and wrote Angie, I'm like, oh my goodness, wow.
yeah. It's and then Mick would come in, and lay the words down.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and the story when they first got together is they sort of locked themselves in a room, or somebody forced them into a room together. You guys sit down till you come out with something, and so yeah, it's just fascinating.
really, I'm glad to hear that you read that book. I wish more people would read it because it talks, particularly where I am, and kind of really what started this podcast was the Delta and the blues. Um, and as they spent a lot of time in the Delta, a lot of time in Mississippi, and Honky Tonk Woman, right?
Well, they were sort of open about, they took black music and served it up to white people. I mean, that's basically what they did.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's what most people don't realize, that's what a lot of the English bands back then did. That's what it was.
Right.
So great book. I still don't understand how he's alive, but he is.
I don't either.
So Mark, when people meet you and they say, well, what do you do? Or who are you? Or what is your answer with all the different things that you do?
Well,
What's the one thing?
It's I've had people ask that before, and sometimes I tell people at times that I don't feel like I'm doing any of it very well, because I'm sort of spread across different things. But I don't know. I've been fortunate to be able to do things. So, I have law partners who were willing to let me do stuff and still stay in the law firm. I was fortunate to be elected to office, and glad I did it, and glad it's over.
Yeah.
And so I've tried to, I don't know, your life, as life goes on, I never thought I would be a writer. When I was, 13, 14, 18, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I am a lawyer. But I had sort of, I don't know if it was like early midlife crisis or something, and I kind of decided after 10 years of practicing law, man, it got to be more than this. And so I decided I wanted to try and teach some and maybe run for elected office and try and write a book. And eventually I did all three of those. And I taught for a couple of years at the community college here, and that was enough to cure me of wanting to do that. And then, in a fit of insanity, I ran for office and was elected, and that was fine. But again, glad it's over. And I had this naive assumption I could just sit down and write a book and somebody would want it. And I later saw somebody refer to that as the equivalent of waking up one morning and saying, "Hey, I think I'll go practice thoracic surgery today." And so I had no idea what I was doing. And I was very fortunate in that regard. So I got some good advice and good editing, and the book actually got published. And so then I was sort of, that started me on all of that.
So lawyer first, I think if what I just heard, lawyer first, and then it just, life moves forward, things happen, inspiration happens to all of us. And then the writing thing, I think you're right. I've got to feel like a lot of people in the world think about writing a book. And when you put a white piece of paper in front of somebody, that's where it ends. Oh, well, I thought this was going to be a good idea, but maybe not, Well,
either that, or I tell people that the second most frequent thing I hear after, well, I've always wanted to run for public office is, well, I've got 6 chapters of a novel finished, and my response is, well, finish the thing, knock it out. And it really is the hardest part of just staying with it to get it done.
I would imagine running for office or commissioner or anything like that is kind of like a boat. It's exciting to buy it, but it's more exciting to sell it.
Yeah, it's pretty close on that. You won't find a lot of disagreement among ex-elected officials on that one.
That's interesting. Well, let's hear a little bit about your first book.
Yeah,
it sounds fascinating.
So the book was I started writing this in the late 1990s. So
okay.
And at the time, my kids were really young, and the only time I could write was early in the morning. So I'd get up early, write for a little while, and then it's, chaos the rest of the day. And by the evening, I'm so exhausted, I can't do anything. And so, I had this idea for the novel, and it's still a great idea. I had cause to look back on that book a couple of years ago and read some of it. And I remember thinking, well, some of this is like, hey, this is pretty good. And then some of it I go, I think I've improved some since then. But the basic story is it's about a woman, a black woman who claims to be Christ returned. And this reporter that follows her around and tries to see, is she or isn't she? And I still think the whole concept is great because, if you're a Christian, Jesus wasn't exactly what people were expecting the first time. So why would you think that would be that way in time number 2? I can, you can sort of, if not predict, some people would be, yes, yes, yes on this, and some people would say absolutely not. So I just thought it was an interesting thing to work with, and it got published and did okay.
Wow. Well, and so what was your, at the time, what was your inspiration on that one? What?
I don't really remember that I was raised as a Southern Baptist, and
Yeah.
when I got married, my wife told me that I was welcome to join the Lutheran church because she had no intention of becoming a Southern Baptist. And so I did. And that was a whole, different experience. And I taught Sunday school in the Lutheran church for a decade of the children and young adults. And I remember thinking, if the church people really knew what I thought, I'd probably be kicked out of the church, much less teaching the children. But it's always interesting to me, the whole religious aspects of everything. And one of the things we did when I was a Sunday school teacher is we'd take the kids around to different churches, just to experience it. We went to a Catholic mass, we went to a synagogue, we went to a Muslim facility, we went to an African American, and just how some of it's very much the same, almost the same schedule and lessons and everything, and then some of it's very different. And so, anyway, it was just it's interesting to me to see that a Unitarian church. I'd never been to one. And my daughter was about 15. She goes, "Dad, did they ever mention Jesus in there? I never heard it." And I'm like, I don't believe they did. So, but anyway, that was some of the just sort of thinking about different aspects of that whole equation.
Very interesting. And to your point, I think I think we're all climbing the same mountain. There's just different ways to
Right.
climb it.
No question. I agree completely.
And then what was next in terms of your book writing? Was
Well,
it
it
the
was
Gendarme?
so that yeah, and this may be more information than you want. So cut me off
No.
at any point.
Yeah, no.
So I never had an agent. I didn't have an agent to get the first book published. It was published by a regional press in Florida. And I remember meeting. It was a husband and wife that sort of ran that, and they came up to Tallahassee, and we had dinner. And they said, "Oh well, now that you've been published, it'll be easy for you to get an agent." Not so. Uh, and so, and back then, I mean, the way you got an agent was there was like a telephone book with, with all these different agents and different things they were looking for. And then you sent these letters that were called query letters. They're basically sort of cold call letters. Here's who I am. Here's what I've done. And so, and even though you sort of prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for rejection, after about 20 or 25, you start to go, well, maybe this just is not that good. And so with the second book, so my heritage is Armenian way back somewhere, and I never knew much about it. And people would ask me, if your name lives in ends in IAN, generally it's a sign of an Armenian. It's a patronym for son of somebody. And so, and all my life, people have asked me, "Are you Armenian?" They'd see my name, and so I said, "Well, yeah, I think so. I don't really know." And so so this guy, we were having a party one night. This guy asked me the same thing. I said, "Same thing. I don't know." And he goes, "Well, have you read this book, The Black Dog of Fate?" I'm like, "Well, I never heard." And so I picked it up and read it. And it's the author, Peter Balakian, sort of, coming to terms with his family's history and the Armenian Genocide, which I knew almost nothing about. And so I said, well, I might be interested in trying to write something about this. And if nothing else, I'll learn something. And so I did a lot of research into this, and it's very, very difficult stuff because there's the story itself is so horrendous about what happened that I'd have to sort of do it in little pieces. But I had come up with this novel, and I had a friend here in Tallahassee who had some success as an author, and he was kind enough to refer me to his agent. And so I send the manuscript to the agent, and he calls me and says, well, hey, he goes, I was only going to read 15 pages of this, but I wound up reading the whole thing. And that novel has a sort of a current day part and a historic part. And the current day part's set in the U.S. in Georgia, in southern Georgia. And so he said, the historic part of your book is awesome, but the current day part, you got to change the whole thing. And I'm like, oh my God, I've been working on this for, over a year. But I change the whole thing, half the book. It takes me like 9 months to do it. And I sent it back to him, and there's no response, no response. Then finally he comes back and says, "Yeah, I'm just not excited about it enough to do it." I'm like, "Oh my God." So but I kept that version of the book. I thought it was a better version. And then I go back to the query letters, and I'm on about number 80. And I got the guy,
80.
my agent, who I was at a cocktail party one night. This guy had asked for an exclusive on the manuscripts. I'd sort of gotten the word back that he liked it. And so I see this, it's a New York number. I said, well, let me step out and take this call. So he says, hey, Mark, it's Scott. He goes, and I said, well, hey, I understand you like the manuscript. He goes, no, I love the manuscript. And I'm like, wow, I've waited a long time to hear that. And
Right.
so he was able to get it in front of editors who could make a decision. So a lady who her novel just before mine was the book The Help, and so it got it had a great launch. Mine had a great launch. Got published in all these different languages. I got invited to speak in Armenia and Venice in Italy, and so it was a really so it was a very it took a long time,
Yeah.
but I was very happy to get that done.
Yeah. Overnight success takes many years.
Right, exactly.
And dealing with rejection. You said something like 80 times, and then all of a sudden you found somebody who actually loved it,
Right.
versus all that. So there's the process that you went through. Tell us a little bit about the book itself. And
Yeah, so the book, and I think one of the reasons that the book did so well, it was different in a certain respect. So this in the book, it's the story. The book opens that there's this 92-year-old guy in South Georgia, and he has a medical issue, and he had fought in World War I and been injured in the war, and he'd fought for Turkey as part of the Ottoman Empire. And he had a head injury in the war, and had lost a lot of his memory, and so was eventually married an American woman, moves to the U.S. And then when he starts to have this medical event in his 90s, he starts to remember stuff that happened back then. And he was a gendarme, a policeman that was escorting these people out of the country. And what happened in 1915 was that the Armenians were Christians and the Turks were Muslims, and the Turks are at war with Russia and with eventually the United States and Great Britain, and so they were very suspicious of this minority within their country that they felt like was maybe not loyal, and so they killed most of the men and forced the women and children to march out of the country through the desert. And so that's the genocide. And so in my story, this guy, he's a gendarme. He's escorting these people out of the country, and he falls in love during that march with one of the Armenian women that are on the way, and it's a woman. She has mismatched eyes, so that's a large part of the story. And the publisher, when they did the book, I'd have to rotate my camera around for you to see this, but maybe I can do that. So this is the cover of the book, and the way they did it, they wrapped the whole cover. So on the back cover, she has one color eye, and the front cover, she blue on the front, green on the back. So anyway, so it was. And then, so he gets to Syria, which is where all these people went, and then they become separated, and then he gets pulled back by the Turks to fight, and then gets injured and sort of lost track. So when he starts remembering this, he's remembering her, and can I find her? What happened to her?
Yeah.
All this. So that's sort of the setup for the book, and it's a little different because it's a little bit of an allegory for Turkey itself, who is, denied all, any that this ever happened. And so it's sort of this guy is sort of like, well, he tried to forget this for, 70 years, but in the end, it all came back. And so I think that's part of, writing from that point of view really hadn't been done before. Most of the books about the genocide are survivor stories of people that made it out. And so this was a little different in that regard.
So how was it received? Was it received differently depending on where?
Yeah, I mean, it did extremely well, really all over. I
Okay.
mean, it did, so it was published, in in Armenia, but eventually in Turkey, which I
It
didn't think would
was.
ever happen.
Yeah.
And I never heard of how it, went or anything like that. I've not been been to Turkey since the book was published. I've been through the airport, but before the book was published, I did go there because one of the first things the editor asked me says, "Well, have you ever been there?" I said, "Well, no," but I told myself, if I get the book published, I'm going. So between the time when I signed the contract and when the book was published, I went to Turkey and to Syria, and I was glad I did. So I went with a couple of friends of mine, and and the whole story of this is, we went into Syria, and there's a no man's land between Turkey and Syria. Still, I assume it's still this way. There's several miles, and there's taxis that sort of ferry people back and forth. And so we get, there, all our people, and we're four of us, and we get over to the Turkish side. And one of the guys that was with us had gotten a new passport between the time we had signed up and when we showed up at the border. And the Syrian people assumed he had been to occupied Palestine, in their terms, and tried to hide it. And so they wouldn't let him in. So that was like a 2-hour operation at the border. And then he had to go back in the taxi. And so the rest of us went on. But there's a citadel in Aleppo in Syria, and that was, has been around for over 1,000 years. It sits on this hill. It's a very iconic thing, and I had described it in the book, and I wanted to see it for myself, and I'm glad I did, because you can describe things a lot based on research, but there's a little element that, seeing it for yourself, it wasn't exactly the way I described it. So I got the chance to fix all that. And we laugh still today because the trial lawyers hadn't made it to Aleppo at this point, because you could climb all up and down that thing and nobody cared. And so there's ladders, and we're up, and so it was all pretty cool. But on the way back, so we get back to the border to go back to Turkey, and and our guide leaves. We're in the taxi now, and with some 19-year-old cab driver, and get out to the last gate, and they won't let us out. And so he has to go back around. And I think the guards wanted a bribe of some kind, and we were too stupid to realize that. So the taxi driver's arguing on our behalf. And so finally they let us out, and we get out of there. But the whole thing was pretty remarkable. And it was sad that, during the Syrian civil war, Aleppo was sort of at the center of the action. And so I think the citadel was damaged. I don't know what shape it's in today, which is a sad thing.
So it allowed you to have an influence on the book, even though you went after it was ready to be published.
Yeah, well, it wasn't published yet, so I was still able to change things before. I mean, again, it was, I didn't change much, and it was just some of the description. But even going through the desert, from Turkey to Syria, there were little things that weren't quite as the way I had visualized them in writing it. So it was a very helpful thing. I was glad I was able to do it.
That's very cool. Yeah, I was curious when I read about it, how it was received in Turkey because of the perspective that you put on it.
Yeah, I just don't know. I never heard much. I mean, I think that things have softened a little bit in Turkey, because for a while, there were people that were being arrested if they mentioned the genocide. And I don't think it's quite that at that level anymore.
Right.
But even here, so I did this with the first book, The Return, too. So, I used some Turkish words in the Gendarme, and obviously I don't speak Turkish. So I advertised here in Tallahassee for somebody, that spoke Turkish, to read the manuscript and just tell me if I, was right or wrong. And so this couple that were graduate students at Florida State, contacted me and agreed to do it. We agreed on a payment. They leave. They come back a few days later and say, we can't do this. We'd get in trouble for this.
Really? Yeah.
And so I finally found somebody else that would do it, another student, and I asked him about it afterwards, and I said, "Well, were you offended by this?" And he said, "Well, not really offended, but," he goes, "Turkey is moving. This is ancient history. Turkey is moving past this." And I think it's a little bit about, I don't know, people in the U.S., a lot of feel about slavery. Hey, that was 100 years ago. This is now, we're moving forward. And that's, maybe easy to say if you're the ones that weren't, suffering back then. But that was, it was very interesting in that regard.
I was wondering if there were some parallel lines as you were going through the process. Yeah, very interesting. I have a friend through work in Turkey, and but I've never been there. And
It's beautiful. I mean,
yeah,
we spent a little time there before going to Syria and went to Cappadocia, which is where and they have these. We stayed in a cave hotel because there's all these caves where Christians there, hid from people. They
wow,
had big, sort of,
yeah,
deep things they could get down into. And but the people back then, I think, were about 5'6" or so. I kept scraping my head on the top of the cave hotel. But it was it's a beautiful place. It was very, very cool to go there.
yeah. Were you so when you were there? Were you research minded? Were you looking for? I don't know if you'd find books on it, or were you looking for historical artifacts or anything about it?
No, it was just more the physical sense of being in
Physical,
the
yeah,
places I described. Like the guide, I mean, we had excellent guides in Turkey, and a young woman, and they have to go to guide school for some period of time, and it's a profession. It's not just a sideline.
right,
But she didn't want to talk about genocide. That was
yeah,
the other thing she didn't want to talk about was the movie. Slipping my mind with Brad something, the famous prison escape movie in Turkey, Midnight Express.
mm,
So we passed what looked like a prison. We're like, oh, it's like Midnight Express. Nah, didn't want to talk about that at all. So anyway, that was interesting.
that is fascinating. So what was next for you on the book?
Well, so my third novel was Boy with Wings.
Boy
Came
with
out
Wings, yeah,
last year, and so that book is a story of a boy he's born with these strange sort of appendage things on his back, and he ends up in a freak show traveling the South in the 1930s,
mm,
and so the book touches on issues of race and religion, but more than anything about what it means to be different, and which I think resonates in this point in time. And I had done a lot of research about sideshows and freak shows. And I had a lot of people ask, "Well, why are Mark? You seem like such a normal guy, and here you like reading all this dark stuff." But I just I don't, maybe it's from going to the North Florida Fair when I was 10, and they have the big lurid signs, see the world's smallest horse, or wild man from Borneo or whatever. And so I did a lot of research, read, and there, a lot of those, circuses, sideshows, wintered in Florida, and there's museums, down the west coast of Florida. There's a sideshow museum and stuff like this. So
right,
I had, and there's several, there were several documentaries. There's a little town down there called Gibtown that's mostly kind of circus freaks, that they ran the diner and all this stuff. But and then there's a movie. I don't know if you've ever heard of this called Freaks came out in the 30s. It's a guy named Todd Browning did it, and it's sort of a benchmark for people to kind of go back to. And the story of that was sort of these. It's this sideshow that the owner is mean to these people, and they sort of take over. But they had all sorts of very human oddities in that show, and so that was all influences on this. And I tried when I was writing the book, and even after it was done, I wanted to interview a current sideshow performer, and there aren't that many sideshows anymore.
yeah. I was going to
And
say,
of all things, I see where there's a sideshow coming to Tallahassee. I'm like, oh my goodness! So I sign up for the VIP experience where I can meet the performers and all this, and then they cancel it. And then I see it rescheduled, So I said, all right, so same thing. I'm at the VIP thing. I go out there to this place and they go, oh, you're not here for the sideshow, are you? Yeah, they canceled that. But I got the name of this guy sort of through all that and got his email address and emailed him about, hey, would you be interested in, by this time my book was being published. I said, would you be interested in maybe appearing with me and let me just interview you at a bookstore, and after several tries, he eventually got in touch. I said, yeah, he'd be willing to do that. And so his stage name is Short E Dangerously. and he's a half man. His body ends at the bottom of his rib cage, and he walks on his hands or gets around on a skateboard. And so, and when we finally made contact, I said, "Well, I just want to ask you what your life is like. I mean, when you walk in the room, everybody here is looking at you because you look different." And he said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And he said, "Well, you want me to perform?" I'm like, "Oh, what kind of performance?" And he says, "Well, I can do the push-ups." And he goes, "And if that gets the crowd going, I can do a handstand. And if I really want to blow the roof off, I'll do a one-armed handstand." I'm like, "Oh my God." And so he goes, and then he says, that game with the cups where you put a ball into the cup and you have to guess which one it is. And he said, "Well, I do that, but I put a spike under a paper cup. And then I slam my hand down on the ones that don't have the spike." And he said, "If you Google magic tricks gone wrong, this is the first thing that comes up." I'm like, "Okay." So we did this twice. So I did a bit with him in Coral Gables at a bookstore and another one in Savannah. And I really enjoyed meeting him. He was a very sort of regular guy in some extent. He says, I'm not a, trying to be an inspiration. I'm just a guy that gets by, and he had said he traveled all over the world with the sideshows, and he, learned how to breathe fire and sword swallow, because anymore you can't just be a human oddity, you got to do something. You got to be a performer, not just somebody look at you because you've got some deformity. And so he, but he said it wore him out, and he got really sick, and he decided after that he couldn't do it anymore. So for the last 10 years ago, he's been a DJ at a strip club in Daytona. And so when he had lunch with my wife and I, he said, "Well, this is probably the most normal conversation I've had in a long time."
I bet.
So anyway, but it was a lot of fun. It was a super guy, and it was, very interesting stories. He says there's statues of me all over the world. There's one in Budapest, one here, and so it's like, wow, this is really cool.
Well, we grew up kind of like, I don't know, as a kid and stuff. There was the circus. There was always the circus, whether it came to town or you went to a big circus. There's books you read as a kid about the circus and the freaks.
Yeah. The fat lady, the giant,
the big guy, or, like you said, blowing fire, swallowing the swords, doing the tricks, or, all that stuff just seemed, and I never really thought of it, but you're right. It all just kind of went away.
Yeah. And I found this book of this, it was sort of this guy was a cultural psychologist or something. And he had all these theories about why people were sort of, just sort of infatuated with human oddity. And part of it sort of made sense to me, and then part of it didn't. So for one part, he said, "Well, as an infant, everyone's a giant." Perception. I said, "Well, I never really thought about that, but you're right." But then he had all this sort of, psychosexual stuff. I'm like, I'm not quite so sure about all that. But it was interesting, just trying to dig into all of that, because people, again, have asked me, "Why did you write about this?" I said, "Well, I don't know. It's just sort of a, the way the book is structured is a little bit different too, because I redone this, or the way it's structured is that the boy Johnny is his name. All of his chapters are written from a third person point of view. So there's a little bit of distance between you as the reader and him. Whereas the other characters, and there's a number of them, they're first person. So there's, so that's, and I wanted it to be that you sort of learned about Johnny a lot from what these other people thought of them.
Yeah.
And they all sort of try to project them what they want him to be. One person's, convinced he's the Messiah, another person thinks he's the devil, another person wants to be him, and so it's all, so anyway, I've had several people tell me, "Oh, you can't do that. That won't work." And so I tried it different ways. I reversed that. I made them all third person, all first person. And finally I went back to the way I'd done it originally. And I'm glad I did. I think it worked out.
That's interesting. Wow. You answered my next question, which was the inspiration being like, how did that come to your mind? I was just thinking too, as you were talking, we used to watch American Horror Story,
Mm-hmm.
and really one of the few ones I can remember was Freak Show.
Right.
I don't know if you watched that or not, but
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, but I never watched it.
yeah, it was basically what we're talking about here. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it would even be acceptable anymore in today's world.
Well, again, what he told me is that there's sort of, you have to perform. You can't just,
To be the strongest man in the world.
Yeah. But he said, like, Ripley's Believe It or Not, said he does stuff there all the time because there's that element still of that a little bit that's there.
Guinness Book of World Records, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And what see, that was what, last couple of years ago you wrote that?
Last year, about this time, came out about a year ago.
Okay. You got your next one in mind, or can you even say?
Well, yeah, I'm sort of superstitious about talking about it, actually, because whenever I would tell people that, like, well, what happened to the Revolutionary War novel? Because you never in the publishing world, you never know what's going to get done or not. And that's an interesting topic just for a second, because that's changed a lot in the years I've been doing this. And I've had the experience now of The Return. The first book was published by a regional publisher, the Gendarme by one of the big five, and then Boy with Wings by an independent publisher. And so, when I first started this, I mean, self-publishing was kind of looked down upon. It was just that's a vanity thing. Nobody wants to do that. And that's changed, not completely, but it's changed. So my Boy with Wings was not self-published. I mean, they paid me. I didn't pay them anything. But still, with an independent press, you have to, everybody seems to think it's self-published. And I have to go, well, no, this is not self-published. There's nothing wrong with that. But, and so, a lot of the marketing falls upon me as the author, which I accepted. I knew this would be this way. And I dedicated a fair amount of time and resources to promoting the book. But, is that really what I would want to be spending my time on if I didn't have to? Well, no, I'd rather be writing.
Yes.
It's just sort of a necessary evil. And I noticed, authors that are way published, millions and millions of books still do a ton of, just publicity and promotion for the book. I mean, it is what it is. And I think there's so many books out now because of self-publishing. I mean, I forget the number, but it's of a magnitude of many, many times what it was 10 or 20 years ago. And so the challenge is just sort of separating yourself from the crowd somehow, that there's so much out there, what's worth reading and what's not. And so there's a lot of reviewers now that people will pay attention to sometimes and that sort of thing.
It's not just the New York Times bestseller anymore.
No. In fact, there are very few people. I mean, it used to be there, every major newspaper almost had, book reviews and stuff. And now the New York Times and maybe one or two more do. I mean, there's almost nothing in that arena anymore. And there's plenty of independent reviewers that, and some that will, for a nice fee, will review your book. And so that sort of thing.
I would imagine too. Well, so a couple books that I'm reading right now were just referred to me by friends and acquaintances, but I've gone to Amazon. I've looked at, obviously, when I think of Amazon, I think about when he was in his garage trying to distribute books. But I'm sure there's a platform. I don't know this, but I would assume that there's a self-published platform on Amazon. I don't know. What is it? So if I could digress just a little bit, because I'm really interested in, how you did this, how to write a book. So you spend a year, I'm going to make it up, but you spend a year or more. So you have a manuscript. I mean, you have your thoughts on paper. And you mentioned the queue, right? Getting into the queue and somebody sees it, likes it. Maybe it's just like a movie. You see a script, you like it. So they ultimately, if that works out, they ultimately then have writers or editors come in, and what are they doing to your manuscript?
Well, they're reviewing it and giving you suggested changes.
Okay.
And there's different types of editors. There's something called a line editor who's going like word by word, and should be a comma here.
grammar.
Grammar's not quite right. And then there's more conceptual, editors that are focused on, does the whole story fit, and cut this, put this, add to this. And so my experience with each book has been sort of the same on that regard. And it's also a little bit of a negotiation with the editor and the author. So for me, 25% of the suggestions were, absolutely, you were right. Thank you so much for catching this. Or, because as an author, you read it so many times that I just, still, I just can't see stuff that other people can see. And then about 50% were, I didn't care that much one way or the other. It was fine. And then 25% I didn't want to do. And so we sort of worked through that. But so the Gendarme, that was Amy Einhorn, who had also done The Help. And so she, we went through 4 rounds of major edits to that book.
Mm.
And the last part, she said, there's something bugging me about this. And I finally figured it out. And I've had this with other lawyers who are writers. She goes, you use too many semicolons. And I said, well, that's the way I write. She goes, no, get rid of them. And so I'm by the end, I was picking books off my shelf and counting the number of semicolons in the first chapter. And then, saying, hey, I'm in the lowest quartile here. And so finally we just, she let it go. But that, that's sort of been my experience with that process.
Interesting. I when I read a book, I don't even think I pay attention to commas and semicolons.
Well, and you
I don't even think about
it strikes you as wrong, and that's
Right.
sort of the goal, is that it's all flows, and you don't pay any attention to that. You're looking at the characters in the story.
So between, let's say, the Gendarme and The Boy with Wings, technology in our world has changed, right? So I remember, I don't know how long it's been now, but I remember when a tool called Grammarly was just released probably 5 years ago. And I started using Grammarly, which is a grammar
right
AI type tool. I started using it all the time for work. I'd have it in my emails. I'd have it for, I've been in marketing sales. So I've always had to write copy or something, decks, whatever. And now full-blown AI, well, what we think of now is full-blown AI, where you could talk to it, and
right.
you could probably, I don't want to go out on a limb here, but if you have an idea about a book, I'm sure AI could really help you get pretty far down the road with it.
Well,
what do you think?
I'm part of the settlement in the lawsuit with the AI, where they had used a bunch of authors' books to train AI, anybody. And so,
Okay.
so I don't, that's through the publisher. I'm sure that by the time money gets to me, it'll be, a tiny little bit. But I promise you could, I've never done this, but I'm sure somebody could, write me a chapter in the style of Mark Mustian, and it would do it and be pretty close. And so it's changing the whole world, and in the book world and in the legal world. So we deal with it some at the law firm as well. What's acceptable, what's not, and there's a whole thing now. I'm a member of something called the Authors Guild, which is sort of a authors association, and you can get a badge to put on your book that says basically human generated or something like that, that's supposed to distinguish it from something being written by AI. So it's pretty remarkable, sort of where things are.
Yeah, I read a lot about copyright issues now with AI. And by the way, I apologize for mispronouncing your name.
I'm sorry?
I apologize for mispronouncing your first name in the beginning.
Trust me, the entirety of my life I've heard it. It doesn't faze me at all anymore, because so don't worry about it.
I just had a guest was Mustaine, just like the guitarist singer.
Yeah, we're probably distantly related, because I think the spelling of the name got changed at some point. So so that's you don't see this name very often. So usually we're related in some fashion, even if it's AIN.
Interesting. Okay, very cool. So author, we've covered that. Let's move into the festival. Tell me, when did that side project, did it come to you?
Well, so we started it in 2015 was the first festival.
Okay.
and we had an awesome lineup, and it's done in a public park here that at the time really had very limited indoor space. There's now a hotel there, so we have a ballroom and other indoor space we can work
Wow.
with. But it's under tents basically in this big public park. And so the first year that we had Ann Patchett, the author, Vernon Reed, the guitarist. We had a whole bunch of people, and it rained, and so Ann Patchett ended up being in a room, that was maybe, designed to hold 20 with like 100 people there. It was humid. Her hair was standing like out on, Frankenstein's Bride, but she was a trooper. She did it, and so it was, it was. Then we had, I don't know if you know who. So the actor Tony Hale, he played in Veep. He was the assistant to the vice president, and he's from Tallahassee, and so he had written a children's book, and we had him come down, and so he was on stage, talking about the book, and it started with lightning, and people were like, off the stage, lightning alert, like, oh my God. So anyway, but we, like I said, we've kept at it, and it's grown over the years. We probably, we average probably about 15,000 people. It's obviously weather dependent. Hopefully it will be sunny next weekend. But we it's a lot. The headline of Music Act this year, the structure of the festival, there's a ticketed show Friday night in the amphitheater, and then it's free all weekend. And we have, I think we have 9 different stages with, 50 different acts. And so the ticketed show is Earth, Wind, and Fire this year. And we've had, it can be a little bit of a challenge. That's actually one of the biggest challenges of the festival, is trying to fit that in, because it's, we've got one date, we come the next week. No, it doesn't work. Got to be this date. And so, but we've had, last year we had the Violent Femmes with the Tallahassee Symphony. The year before we had the Flaming Lips. Year before, Ben Folds with a symphony, Amy Johnson. We've had good people. So it's Jason Isbell. We had Ava Brothers. It's all been pretty fun.
That is fantastic. How many days is it now?
It's really 2.5 days. So it's a Friday night show, and then all day Saturday and Sunday.
That is fantastic. What was the kernel behind the idea? Like, what is it? Just something you thought was cool? I like music. I like literature. I like stories of the South. What kind of brought it all?
Well, we just, again, kind of decided we wanted to do something different, and it seemed sort of an easy fit, and nobody else was doing it.
And nobody was doing it.
Yeah. And so we, we asked, the first year we had the, I don't know if you remember, because she's passed away now, the author Julia Reed. Do you remember her? She's from Mississippi, and a funny lady. She had, we asked her, say, well, hey, do you have a musician friend you want to do this? Eden Britt, she'll come do it. And so the two of them appeared together. It was great. I mean, it was, it kind of got us on our way.
Very, very cool. Do you try to focus on the culture of the South, or do you just, it happens to be in the South and it is what it is?
Well, some of both. We try not to be completely, if you're from New York, and, we had James McBride down, who was awesome. That was good. But we've also sort of, we are in the South. And so we did one of the things I'm proudest of, we did a tribute to Muscle Shoals. And we had these guys come down that were, really session players with and it was Don Hood. It was Patterson Hood's father, and I don't know. Do you know John Paul White, the musician? He was with a group called the Civil Wars, and he's just a phenomenal singer. So they came down and did a tribute to sort of Muscle Shoals musicians. That was good.
Wow.
We did a tribute. Nat and Cannonball Adderley, the jazz players, are from Tallahassee. So we did a tribute to them. Members of their family came, saxophone players from all over the world. I mean, that was great. So we're just trying to do something different every year, and just kind of keep it on the edge.
I love it. I'm still trying to picture the Violent Femmes. And was it an orchestra, you said?
Yeah.
I saw the Violent Femmes. So I grew up in Los Angeles, so I saw the Violent Femmes. I probably saw them half a dozen times back in the 90s.
They're very nice guys too.
Yeah.
Back, and so they're like, so I saw one of the guys at the, breakfast the next morning at the hotel, and he goes, well, I didn't know. Are we the headliner? It's like, well, yeah, you're the headliner. But what about the Flaming Lips? I was vaguely familiar
Wow.
with. I
Yeah.
wasn't really, but boy, what a show! I mean,
Oh,
that
that's to
was
say they
like,
put on a show.
it was super, super nice too. Wayne, the main guy, and it was just it was great.
Saw them in New Jersey on the shore,
Really.
or at the shore, as they say up there. Um, and Wayne, they had a big plastic ball, massive,
Mhm.
and he was in it, and it rolled him out into the audience, and the audience would shuffle him around on the ball.
I've seen videos of this, and people asked me, was he going to do it at the festival, and he did not do that, but he did. They had a whole bunch of other visual, like puppet things on stage, and at the very end, and I've been told about this, they have like these balloons that spelled out "Fuck you, Tallahassee," and you got to like that. I
Yeah,
mean,
right. That's awesome. And then you got Earth, Wind, and Fire. I mean, come
yeah,
on.
yeah.
They played here. Was it last year? It was either last year or the year before. We went and saw them, my wife and I, and it was just as you would imagine. It was fantastic.
No, I've seen them once before, but I'm just talking to the production guys about what all's involved with them coming. I mean, normally these bands, it'll be like two, bus and one, semi with their gear. There's like a total of six for Earth, Wind, and Fire. They said what, two just with the costumes. I'm like, really? So anyway, it'll be interesting.
That's awesome. What? So you are you? What is your role? Were you the brainchild, and now you're actually the producer? And I mean, is it the Mark show, or do you got a
Well,
crew?
Well, no. So we have a paid director, and
Okay.
I'm the president, and so I sort of, I'm involved still, probably more than I should be, because at some point somebody else has got to run with this if it's going to go. But and so what I do, at the festival is kind of solve problems, and hey, if there's an issue here, and I'll just kind of wander around and check, what are the crowds like? Is the band, are there any issues? Band sound good? And just sort of get a feel for how things are going. So that's if the weather's bad, that's a whole nother ball game, and we have
Oh,
rain venues now that we can move people out to, but that's a all hands on deck just to pull that off in terms of getting people where they need to go and that sort of thing.
right. Sponsors.
Yeah, so we're on the lookout. We'd love to get a national sponsor,
Right.
and we're probably about 50-50 private and public money in it,
Uh
and it's
huh.
a budget of about $500,000 to put it on. But we're really, we're on the lookout for national sponsors. So we're right now the community college here is the main sponsor of the event, and then we have various other and family memberships and that sort of thing.
If for people that are listening, can they just go to your website and recommend artists that you may want to consider, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, either go to my website, it's just markmustian.com, or go to it's wordofsouthfestival.com.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's a place you can recommend artists and anything. And so we're we try and be one of the, I guess it's a sign of success is that everybody who has been in the festival before, and I mean everybody, wants to come back. And so we having literally probably 20 acts per spot that want to be here. And we try and have local folks, because we like to showcase what we got here. I mean, we have world class people right here, but it's sort of a juggling. Hey, I can't get you for a few years. We just had you. I got to have we want this to be fresh, and other people here. So that's sort of our a little bit of a challenge at this point.
Well, it sounds absolutely wonderful. I mean, I go to festivals every year, and um, I think my wife is starting to tap out.
You guys, come on down. This is pretty easy and low key here.
I know, I know, I know. I think she last year, the year before, she went with me again last year, but she's like, I'm done with festivals. I'm done. I don't like to be cold anymore. I don't like to sit on the ground anymore.
Yeah, I get that. I don't. I can't. We do a lot of concerts. My wife and I like live music, and so. But I went to something a year or so ago on Breeze Field. Or no, it was on the soccer field in Madison, Wisconsin, and it was the artist Bon Iver, and it was, I mean, everybody stood the entire for like 3 hours. I just can't do that anymore.
Ooh,
So
yeah.
that was a that was sort of a fork in the road there. Now I'd be able to sit at least some of it.
Right. Um, well, before we wrap up, I'm trying to, just kind of do a memory walk of all the different things that you've been involved in. Is there a common thread? Is there something that holds it all together? Or is it just different inspirations along the way? Like as you move through all of this and you look back?
Well, I think I have, there's a common thread of interest, I think. I mean, most of my books have some religious piece to it. And so
Okay.
that's just common thread. I certainly am a music fan. I'm not a musician. And I've just enjoyed trying to, zig where others zag sometimes,
Okay.
like say, hey, let's just try and do something different. And it's okay to be different. It's good to be different in a lot of
Right.
ways. And so that was sort of what my book was about. And so that, I guess if there's one, it might be that.
Well, I tell you, the world needs more different. I mean, and you've done that. Each book's been a little zag, a different perspective or a different story about something that really doesn't exist anymore, uh, which I never really thought about with the Freaks.
Yeah.
And then literature and music, I can't think of it ever being done. You've said it's never been done, and you're like, hey, let's do this. It's never been done. Why not? It kind of
Well,
makes
you
sense.
got to come down and see us, Sean. It's
Uh,
the generally the last weekend in April. Easter moves us around sometimes, but next year, 27, it'll be last weekend in April again.
okay. Well, I'm definitely going to put it on the list. Just talking to you about it, I've gotten excited, and what you're doing and who you've had. I love all of them.
Yeah.
So who do you listen? So you're a music fan. Can you narrow it down? Do you have a specific genre or artist, or are you kind of just in general, you just like music?
Well, one of the best things about the festival for me and being involved with this is it exposed me to all this music I would
Yeah.
otherwise never have been exposed to. I'm more up to date than I otherwise would have still been listening to the 70s bands and 80s bands and that sort of thing. But now, some of the current artists are just incredibly talented. And so we try to, some folks sort of see us as the festival of Americana music, and I try
Okay.
hard not to do that. I mean, we have a full range. There's jazz, there's hip hop, there's gospel, there's rock, there's pop, so we try and spread it around some. But we have George Clinton, who is 85,
Wow.
going to be there Saturday. So that'll,
Wow.
that'll be fun.
Man, the funk master
I
himself.
know, still
That
going.
is that, and all the get up that oh
Oh
man.
yeah, oh
How
yeah.
about that?
Apparently, according to him, the mothership is coming back later this summer. Not here, but there. It's this huge big thing that they're building it now or something. I don't.
I
So
wouldn't
good
doubt
for
it.
him.
That's fantastic. Well, good
I
for you.
know. Wow.
Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure. It really has. I
I
feel like
know
we
we
could.
could go on for hours, Sean. This is
Yeah. Yeah.
so at some point I'm going to get up to Memphis and see my sister, and so I'd love to get together. That
Well, that would be fantastic.
yeah, I'd enjoy that a lot.
Seriously, I mean, keep my name, my contact information, and I don't know how familiar you are with the area. Your sister's up here, but if there's something we could coordinate, or something you want to see, or whatever, or just have lunch, that would be fantastic. I would love to do that.
That sounds great.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for having me again. This is the fastest hour in a long time for me, so I've enjoyed it a lot.
Well, I will. I will. I got the festival now that I'm going to think about next year, and good luck next weekend. Hopefully, the Mother Nature will be on your side as it takes place. And I want to thank you very much. Very, very interesting, and I look forward to talking to you very soon. Hopefully.
All right, same here. Thanks again.
Take care.